Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating Accessible Performances 101. I'm Kristen Johnson, Local Arts Advancement Program Manager with Americans for the Arts. We've got a great program planned for you today, and I'm excited to introduce our speakers. But first, a couple of quick reminders. First, ArtsU is our e-learning platform offering a variety of training options to support your work in the field. Be sure to visit artsu.americansforthearts.org to view more upcoming events. Next, this presentation includes live captioning. To view the captions, please click on the captioning link that I'm actually about to stick in the chat box for you. In order to view the captions, they will actually pop up in a new window for you. So you'll want to adjust your window size so that you can see the webinar as well as the captioning window at the same time. Next, there will be time for questions at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to type any questions that you think of in the moment in the chat box in the left-hand side of your screen. I see Amelia and Kayla in Maryland have both found the chat box. Hi, guys. Maryland in the house. Sorry, I'm a Maryland resident as well. Thank you for joining us. So please feel free to type any questions that you have or comments over into that chat box where we have some conversation going right now. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available for replay in a couple of days. We'll also include any of the resources that the speakers talk about directly on the event page where you registered. So keep an eye out for that. And lastly, we would like to thank the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts for their support in making this accessibility series possible. Thank you all. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today, Rhoda Bernard and Judith Smith. Rhoda is the Managing Director of the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs, which is the catalyst for the inclusion of individuals with disabilities in all aspects of visual and performing arts education. Rhoda regularly presents research at conferences throughout the United States and abroad and provides professional development workshops for educators in local, national, and international forums. Her work has been published in several book chapters and in numerous journals, including Music Educators Journal, Music Education Research, Action, Criticism, and Theory for Music Education, Mountain Lake Reader, and Arts and Learning Research Journal. Judith Smith is the founding member and artistic director emerita with Axis Dance Company, which is one of the world's driving forces in physically integrated dance. She was born and raised in the mountains of Colorado. Prior to becoming disabled in a car accident at age 17 in 1977, Judith was a champion equestrian. She transferred her passion for riding to dance after discovering contact improvisation in 1983. Judith helped launch Axis in 1987, and she grew the company to be the nation's leading physically integrated dance ensemble. She has left an amazing legacy and vision for the future of access and integrated dance. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers, Rhoda and Judy. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning. Oh, I guess it's afternoon now. I'm on the West Coast. This is Judy, and as Kristen said, I have about 35 years of experience in the performing arts, and specifically in inclusive and integrated dance. And I want to thank AFTA for putting this three-part series together. I think it's really important that we're looking as a field at issues of equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. And this webinar is actually about a lot more than just making a performance accessible. And my hope is that it will inspire you all to create a robust plan for deaf and disability equity and inclusion that will make your organization a leader. Because believe it or not, there are not a lot of organizations that are doing really superior work in this vein. The slide that's up is a photo of Axis Dance Company. And I think it's super important to lay a foundation for deaf and disability inclusion in your organization in order to even maximize the impact of creating a performance that disabled and deaf people would want to come to and would be able to access. And accessibility is really not rocket science, but you know, how do we get there is the question. And, you know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is almost 30 years old. And sadly, you know, there are a lot of organizations that are still just grappling with basic architectural and accessibility and bathroom code compliance. And it's time that we really moved beyond that to full inclusion in all levels of your organization. And the ADA is a civil rights law, but it's really also about human dignity. And I would say, in my experience, that the U.S. performing arts as a field are really decades behind where we could be and where we should be in terms of inclusion. And I want to point you to the United Kingdom because they are really setting the standard worldwide for how they have woven disability arts and disability equity into their cultural platforms. The British Council has a wonderful website, Disability Arts International, which there will be a link on an upcoming slide. But they are doing, you know, probably the most extensive and comprehensive work on disability equity. And of course, you know, when we talk about any kind of equity platform, it really needs to start at the top with the board and the executive staff. And organizations need to embed disability into their diversity, equity, and inclusion platforms. And I can tell you, as a disabled artist and administrator, that, you know, disability got left out of multiculturalism in the 80s, 90s, out of diversity in the 90s, 2000s, and it's getting left out of diversity, inclusion, and equity platforms now. So, you know, part of what, now that I'm retired, I have the bandwidth to do is to, you know, really encourage more equity. And I want to also tell you that, you know, there might be one or two people that are interested in increasing access in your organization, but if it's not institutionalized, it's going to disappear when those people move on. And I can give you a very good example of this. One of our leading presenting organizations in the Bay Area had an executive director who did tremendous work advancing access and inclusion, you know, including in their gallery spaces, in their lobbies, how marketing was presented, etc. And when he moved on, all of the access stuff that he had instituted stopped happening. And I know that I have not been frequenting that particular presenting venue because I showed up and they had put brand new tables in the lobby, and they were all those high tables that somebody in a wheelchair could literally roll under but not use. So this is the thing, is that the commitment has got to start at the top. And if you don't really open your mind and your heart to inclusion, all of the access features in the world won't make your organization a welcoming place. And believe me, we do know the difference. These are some quotes that I really like, and I think they kind of sum up my belief that, you know, to include disabled people is to bring an entirely new perspective and new innovation into your organization. Nothing about us without us. I did a little research on this and was super surprised to find out that this saying actually had its origins in the 1500s in European politics. It came into use in disability activism in the 90s, and it has since moved on to other interest groups, identity politics and movements, as well as the disability movement. But what it really means is to go to the source. The first step is to actually involve the deaf and disabled community, because again, if you're not doing the groundwork just because you present a performance that's ASL interpreted or audio described, the effort is going to fall flat. And organizational readiness is huge. And when we're talking about organizational readiness, it really means starting with a plan, an access and inclusion plan. Engaging deaf and disabled people as advisors is a great first step. Conduct an access and inclusion assessment. And I actually have included a link from Light the World. They have a wonderful, really comprehensive organizational assessment that you can do at your organization. Write an equity statement that includes deaf and disabled people. If you already have an equity statement and it doesn't include deaf and disabled people, you need to go back and really take a look at that, because unless you're including all of us, you're not truly doing deep DEI work. It's really wonderful if you can create an access and an inclusion mission and a vision. And you want to be able to share this statement with your community so that those of us who are disabled out there and our disabled allies really know that you've made a commitment to making your organization a great place for us to go. And it's a great idea to conduct, an initial staff training that's kind of a disability and accessibility 101, in the same way that you might do an unlearning racism class or a racial equity type training. And then, keep instituting those regular trainings, because, people move on, new volunteers come in, and you all want to be on the same page. Here are the resources, some great ones for really looking at your organization. The NEA Design for Accessibility. This is a handbook that's been out for many, many, many years. And Light for the World is a disability inclusion scorecard. And then the British Council, of course. Take a look at all of the incredible things that are happening in the UK in terms of disability arts. Developing partnerships with deaf and disability organizations is the best way to ensure that your efforts around inclusion are really going to be fruitful. And the best way, it's also the best way to know if you're doing it right. I hope that a lot of you have already done this and that you know who your deaf and disability community is. But I will tell you my experience having toured to over 100 cities with Access, where we always do some or a lot of residency work, is that Access was often a presenter's first foray into programming for this community, and they didn't know who their community was or how to reach them. And we often spent hours researching and contacting disability organizations and connecting them with our presenters. And unfortunately, often, once Access left, the disability community was once again ignored. So what I'm hoping that with efforts that are being made by AFTA and Dance USA, as another example, Dance NYC, that this is not going to happen, that disabled people are going to be able to become part of a presenting organization or a performing arts institution's, core community. A really good example of this is the Flynn Center in Vermont. Access coordinated a 6.5-week New England tour with the Flynn Center. We went in and we did Access and Disability 101 trainings with their board, staff, executive leadership, volunteers, and with their Chamber of Commerce. We worked in every aspect of their community, from their dancers to their arts educators. We worked with their blind community. The Flynn offered audio description of a dance performance for the first time. We worked with the deaf community. For our performances and events were ASL interpreted. And they knew that they were going to have a lot more people who use wheelchairs show up in their audience than ever before, and they removed an entire section of seats, and we filled that. And that was the first time that so many disabled people had come to the Flynn. They have since really embraced disability arts, and they include it as a regular part of their programming every year, and they have an institutionalized strategic plan for access and inclusion. And you might wonder, who is the market actually? And just to throw out some numbers to inspire you and give you some incentive, 56 million Americans live with disabilities. We have disposable income of $544 billion. And when you include our family and friends, that goes up to $3.9 trillion. So this is a source of new and loyal audience. And of course, the most important thing is to let people know that you are doing inclusive programming, that you're doing accessible programming, that you're offering events, etc. And it really has to start with your marketing. And I know, this series that AFTA has done, the second part of the series was on marketing, and I encourage you all to go back and take a look at that because they have some really great tips for how to reach the deaf and disabled community. It's really important to let us know that there's something going on that's relevant to us. We want to see reflections of ourselves in programming, and it starts with marketing. And I'll give you a good example of this. When I roll down the street of Berkeley, especially through the theater district or the streets of San Francisco, there are always performance posters in a window. And I just roll by, but if I actually see somebody disabled in one of those posters, I stop and take notice because it's still not very common, to see a disabled person in any kind of media. So I stop and I want to learn more, and I, often go to whatever the performance is that they're advertising. And when I was doing marketing at Access, I always chose photos that included one obviously disabled dancer and one non-disabled dancer. Because again, it's about representation and about letting people know that, there's something going on that's going to be a reflection of their experience. The Flynn Center website is a great example of how to alert people about what the different access offerings are at your organization. They make it really easy to find. It's not embedded, you don't have to click 5 different times to find it. And it's really, really great to, be able to go on a website and just see accessibility. As a disabled consumer, that means a lot to me. And, if you do a lot of audience, photographs of your audience and, your patrons, be sure and include people with disabilities in those because we do like to see ourselves and we like to know that we're welcome. It's important to present relevant programs, and this does mean presenting integrated companies and artists with disabilities and developing residencies that have inclusive events. And I will say that there are a lot more performing arts companies who do not necessarily have disabled people, but they're getting more experience working with people with disabilities and working with diverse communities. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to bring a company like Access all the time, because companies like David Dorfman, several other companies, Vic Marks, Bill T. Jones, these companies all have experience working with diverse communities. Expanding the range of accessibility accommodations for performances, outreach, and events, to include ASL, to include audio description, to include large print programs. And again, presenting companies and artists who actually offer inclusive outreach. And you can begin to ask this. And I know several of you are from state arts agencies, and you can do a lot to encourage inclusion, through your equity platforms, through the way you ask about demographics. I sit on a lot of grant panels, and I'm constantly amazed at how many grants don't include anything about disability demographics. And here are some artists who are deaf and disabled that you can bring to your area, and also that you can use this as resources. Deaf West Theater is a wonderful organization. Allie Stoker, the young blonde woman in the wheelchair, just won a Tony Award, and she is the first actor in a wheelchair to win a Tony, so that was exciting for our community. Access Dance Company, we do extensive residency work. Kinetic Light out of New York is another company, very disability identified and doing some wonderful work, both through their performances and through their outreach. Josh Blue is a comedian who is hilarious, as comedians are supposed to be. He has cerebral palsy, and he's a wonderful, wonderful entertainer and also educator. He does a lot of education just through his comedy. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Rhoda. If you have any questions, we will have time again at the end, but I'm also known for answering every and all email that I get. So I'm professionally interruptible, and please feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Judy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my organization, and we're going to do a deep dive into the sensory-friendly performances that we've given. So we're going to take this conversation in a deep way onto the ground. So just a little bit about the Berklee Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. We are a catalyst for the inclusion of individuals with disabilities in all aspects of visual and performing arts education. We have three main areas of work. We offer arts education programs for the community for people ages 3 to 93. We have about 200 families who come to our campus in Boston every Saturday. We also do a 2-week summer music day camp, and we offer music, dance, and theater programming here on our campus as well as in satellite locations in the Boston area. We offer the only Master of Music and Music Education with a concentration in music and autism in the world, as well as the only graduate certificate in music education and autism. And these programs train music educators about arts education and disability broadly with a deep focus on autism spectrum disorders. Those programs are now in their 6th year, and it is the students and alums from those programs who teach in our community programs. And then we do a whole lot of professional development for educators, including an annual 2-day conference and a lot of other work, webinars like this and other things. The work that we do began at Boston Conservatory in 2007. The Institute was launched in September 2017 as a result of the merger between Boston Conservatory and Berklee College of Music. And there's our web link is at the end of the slides if you want to check out what we do and get in touch if you're interested in learning more. So what I'm going to talk about now are the sensory-friendly performances that we do. So in 2013, back at Boston Conservatory, we did a sensory-friendly performance of Oklahoma, and that was the first ever sensory-friendly performance where all of the performers and musicians in the pit were college students. We're very proud of that long tradition that we have at doing sensory-friendly performances, and it's something that we have continued. Since 2013, we've presented several of them in dance, theater, and music at Boston Conservatory. And since my institute launched in 2017, Berklee has made the commitment to offer sensory-friendly performances in their venues, and I'm currently working with the staffing at the various venues to make sure that they're ready to launch different sensory-friendly performances in different sort of formats, depending on the kinds of work that's being presented. So how did this all come about? I and a woman who was working as outreach director at the time at Boston Conservatory, we saw an NBC nightly news piece on the Theater Development Fund's work with The Lion King on Broadway, which was groundbreaking at the time. This was probably in 2012. And she and I sort of said to each other, we need to do this at Boston Conservatory, and we need to find a way to make it happen. So we immediately contacted the Theater Development Fund, and I recommend them as a partner if you're setting out to offer a sensory-friendly performance for the first time. They were extremely generous with us. They did not ask for any remuneration, and they provided us with resources. They walked us through their experience. They gave us consultation over the phone, and they actually came to Oklahoma and saw it, which was wonderful. So they were very supportive, and they sort of helped us establish a framework. So I recommend them as a partner. We also engaged user experts, and Judy talked a lot about this in her presentation, right? So as we were planning our sensory-friendly performance, we brought individuals with sensory challenges, with cognitive challenges, individuals on the autism spectrum, to our campus, to the space, talked with them about their experience, how we could make this better, and included a lot of their advice and suggestions in what we instituted and what we continue to do. So user experts are an important piece of this work. Similarly, and resonating also with what Judy had to say earlier, we involved staff throughout Boston Conservatory. So this was not just the realm of outreach of the musical theater department, of our theater production and front of house staff, and me and my work. The entire organization became involved. So I gave presentations to all different constituencies, from the board all the way down, informed them about what we were doing, talked with them about what it meant for the organization, gave them the opportunity to be involved, took feedback and questions and suggestions from them, so that it really was an effort throughout our entire organization, and that it was supported throughout, and that we had thought through with all those different constituencies what it meant for them and what it meant for the organization as a whole. When we plan our sensory-friendly performances, we collaborate with the production staff from moment one. So once it's determined, as it was in 2013, Oklahoma is going to be the show. On this date, it's going to be sensory-friendly. As the production team was meeting for Oklahoma, either Kim or I was there the entire time collaborating, attending all the production meetings, making sure that all the considerations for the sensory-friendly performance were incorporated into how people thought about the production as a whole. Even though there were other presentations of that show that were not sensory-friendly, we wanted it to be part of the conversation from moment one. I also trained all of the players involved with the performance. So the box office staff, the house staff, the technical staff, the production staff, the performers, and the musicians. All of these groups received specialized training with me about the population we're working with, about the specific issues they may come up against, about sort of the ways that we had determined we were going to create a safe space, so that everybody, regardless of their involvement in the production, was on the same page. We spent a lot of time attending to the accessibility of our website, and Judy spoke about this as well. We brought in experts in digital strategy for people with disabilities. We're very close to WGBH, our public television station out here in Boston, and they do some really good work in this area. So we brought those folks in and got their advice and incorporated changes to our website to make it more accessible. We also provide a lot of preparatory materials both on the web, and we have it available in other formats if people need it. So a lot of information about the theater, about the production, so that people feel really prepared for what they're walking into. We crafted social stories. My staff crafted social stories. We had written social stories at various levels for younger children, for adolescents, for older folks, and for adults, so that you could click on and see a social story that walks a prospective visitor through the entire experience of going to see the show. And then we created a video social story, which we posted online, and we also had the link available if people asked us for it. This was extremely effective. So this was a video from the perspective of a patron coming to the theater, walking in, getting their ticket, walking into the space, getting their program, sitting down, the whole outline of events from the perspective of a visitor. It was extremely helpful to prepare the audience, many of whom are folks who had not visited our theater previously and really relied on this preparation. We've paid very close attention to customer service for all of our patrons. So I spent a lot of time with all of the different points for customer service. So for example, we decided that our sensory-friendly performances, and this is still the case, are open to anyone. So yes, they are sensory-friendly, and we make adaptations and provide a lot of additional supports, which I'll talk about in a moment. But you do not have to need those supports in order to attend the performance. So we want to have clear communications with all of our patrons that everyone is welcome, but if you go to this performance, this is how it's going to be changed. So we paid a lot of attention to providing important customer service information to all of the patrons. We reached out to local organizations. This is another echo with Judy. And I already had a lot of networks from the work that I was doing at Boston Conservatory at the time. We increased our network and reached out and involved them to help us. And we also reached out to schools. And part of that was to bring in audience, but it was also, in addition to our user experts, we wanted a broader base survey in terms of when do we schedule this performance to take place. And the overwhelming preference was for Sunday afternoon. So we have been doing these on Sunday afternoons ever since. And that's when people are available and able to make it, and it works out really well. So what did we actually do, and what do we do when we continue to do our sensory-friendly performances? So the production itself is adapted. So fewer extreme dynamics, especially extreme louds, and fewer sudden sounds, sudden lights, and so forth. So I spend a lot of time with the script, if it's a dance performance, with the music that's being used and the lighting that's being used, to make sure that we're not overwhelming the senses. So to take away the extremes, and if there are too many layers, to simplify some of those elements. We make adaptations to the music. The biggest adaptation was that the orchestra pit does not warm up in the theater. They warm up in a separate space where you can't hear them. And the reasoning behind that is that instrumental warm-ups are loud, unpredictable sounds and layers of what could be overwhelming sonically for some people. So we have the orchestra pit warm up in a separate space. We increase the front of house staffing, so there are many more ushers. And since I have this wonderful staff of students and alumni who have studied in our graduate programs, they are a wonderful source of volunteers for front of house staffing, so that there are additional hands on deck for questions, to help make the space feel safe, to open things up for people. We have a quiet room available. Ideally, you want your quiet room as close as possible to the room or theater where the production is taking place. We're able to use a space either right next door in one building or right across the hall in another. And the Berklee spaces that I'm working with all have spaces right next door. So this is a room where people can go when it's overwhelming. They can get up and leave the theater or the performance space, go to the quiet room. The quiet room has staff who are experienced in working with people with disabilities. For younger folks, it has activities. We have coloring books and crayons and that sort of thing. And we usually try to have activities that have some thematic connection to what they're seeing. So for Oklahoma, we had a whole lot of cowboy-related and Western-related activities. We also have mats on the floor if someone just needs to lie on the floor or roll on the floor, tables and chairs for seating, and we simulcast the production on a TV screen in the space so that if someone has to leave and they leave with a friend or a parent or whatever, that the show is still there if they want to see it, but they need to see it in a quieter space. The ushers have fidgets, usually things like stress balls and that sort of thing, and earplugs and headphones available if people need them. And we usually have our ushers wear a button pinned to their clothes that say, "I have headphones," another one that says, "I have fidgets," and you can ask them if you need one, and you can get one. The house lights are always on. They're not full blast. They are on the dimmer side so that people can come and go and move around, and the space is made safe for that. And so there is a lot of noise. And it's interesting when I train the performers about this because I let them know you're going to hear a lot of noise. And when you're training as a performer, you are usually accustomed to quiet. When the space is truly quiet, then you know you've got the audience right with you. Well, in the case of a sensory-friendly performance, it's often the opposite. Those noises can often be signs that folks are listening and really into it and are engaged and excited and emotional about it. So not to fear the noise, right? You have to, as a performer, concentrate and be able to stay focused with the noise, but understanding that all of that is totally cool and totally safe. To help with the safety, we also have glow sticks. So the ushers each have a glow stick, and when there is going to be anything that might be a little bit sudden, they raise the glow stick up so there's a warning. So, for example, in Oklahoma, we did do a lot of work to take down some of the extreme volume. But one sudden thing that happens in Oklahoma is that there is a gunshot. And it is critical to the plot. We cannot eliminate the gunshot. We made it softer, but we could not eliminate it entirely. So we had glow stick, and we announced before the performance begins that if you see a glow stick go up in the air, that means something is about to happen, a sound or a lighting cue, and just to be ready for it. And we found that people really like those warnings. We also do a meet and greet with the cast or performers after the performance in the lobby, which is wonderful too because it sort of takes down that fourth wall and allows for some interaction, and they've been beautiful after the performance on both sides. We have found that our sensory-friendly performances have had a tremendous impact in a number of ways. We knew that we would make an impact on the audience. We knew that the attendees would enjoy it, that they would feel welcome, that it would be a good experience for them, and that's true. We receive emails and voicemails and lots of in-person conversations around how welcome people feel in the space, how safe it is, how much they want to come back, how they'd like to come back and try not going to a sensory-friendly performance, but going to a performance that's just a regular performance and see how it goes. And that's wonderful to hear, that these are families who now want to make coming to performances in this space a part of their regular lives. What has been more surprising has been the effect on the staff, the performers, and our organization. So our staff that day always comes to me with stories about an encounter they would have had with an individual or a family that is meaningful to them. So one of the ushers at Oklahoma in particular came up to me and said, when this particular family was leaving, the mom had to give the usher a big hug. Just thank you for making this possible. Thank you for this wonderful day. And just to have, an usher doesn't usually get a hug on the way out. So that was pretty exciting, to know that they made an impact by being part of this. The performers are always deeply moved by the experience. We've been doing some consulting with other organizations. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we did some consulting at Speakeasy Stage Company, which is a theater in Boston that had never done sensory-friendly performances before. We've done some with them. And the performers were blown away by the experience of presenting theater to this audience. And they would talk with patrons afterwards or notice people excited and jumping up and down for joy in the audience during the show, and to get that feedback meant a lot. I'll never forget an email that I got the day of our Oklahoma performance. So we did a Sunday matinee of Oklahoma, and later that afternoon I go home and I get an email from a gentleman who was playing trumpet in the pit. And he wrote to me and said, I'm here at music school, and I'm not sure if I'm ever going to make a living making music. But today, doing this performance, I found out why I make music and why it's important to me. And he thanked me for that. And I guess what had happened is during intermission, some of our patrons came over to the orchestra pit. Well, one of them was interested in the trumpet, so he spent some time with them, showed him the trumpet, played a little bit for him. And I think that encounter in particular really helped him feel like he was close to his audience in a way he had never been before. It's pretty exciting. Throughout our conversations at the organization, and one of the great things about getting everybody on board is that it's led to lots of other conversations, people talk now about how the values of our organization changed from the experience of offering sensory-friendly performances. The arts have power to change everybody's lives, and to see what can be possible for people who often don't get to experience live performances, to be able to open up that opportunity really helped reaffirm for a lot of people and transform, in other people's cases, their sense of values. So what we do now is we continue to offer sensory-friendly performances, and we're using new venues to do that. We share the lessons that we've learned. In Massachusetts, we have this wonderful initiative called UP, which stands for Universal Participation. It's part of our Massachusetts Cultural Council. UP, we are an UP organization, and as such, we are required to provide information and training and support to other organizations. There's an institutional learning network that's put together by UP, and we have done formal and informal conversations and presentations and webinars, and we've also done some conference presentations. I was at the LEAD conference last year presenting on this exact item. Finally, we provide a lot of consultations and resources to other organizations. We're trying to pay forward what Theater Development Fund did so well for us. We consult with other organizations by phone or Skype or in person, and if the organization is local, we'll provide volunteers and other supports, like with Speakeasy Stage Company, where I bring over 10 or 15 volunteers, and we take over for the day, making sure that their sensory-friendly performance goes well, and we help them with marketing and audience development and all sorts of other pieces as well. So that is the end of my portion of today, and it's great because we've got about 15 minutes or so for questions. So I know Kristen is going to moderate the questions that come in over the chat. As people are putting in their questions, we have contact information for both of us at the end of the presentation, and absolutely please feel free to reach out to me over email. I'm very happy to answer any questions or offer any advice that I can. So I think I'll hand it back to Kristen.
Great. Thank you so much, Rhoda. Thank you again, Rhoda and Judy. So what we're going to do now is turn it over to you guys for questions. So if you have any questions at all, no matter kind of how big or how small they might feel free to type them in the chat box over on the left-hand side of your screen. While we give you all just kind of a few minutes to think of some questions that you might have for either Judy or Rhoda, I'm gonna kick it off with a question that I have. So Rhoda, my first question is actually for you. So you had talked about working specifically with actually consultants at a few different points in your planning process, but you did specifically reference consultants that you worked with when you were preparing things like digital materials and thinking of what videos you might create. I'm curious what some of the advice was that these consultants really gave you in terms of what you should be thinking of that your website should have, and kind of some other ideas that they might have given to you aside from some of the things that you talked about.
Well, I think the biggest, in terms of the web, they did sort of an accessibility audit of that section of the site. So they helped with making sure that information was easy to read with a screen reader, that it was clear, that everything that was that needed to be found was highlighted carefully, that all of the information about this particular performance and this work was easy to find in the overall website, those sorts of things. In terms of what to include for support, we knew we wanted to do social stories, and we knew we wanted to provide more information about the show and about the experience. We did focus groups with user experts and asked them, when you're going, if you're arranging an outing to the theater, what are the things you need to know, right? So everything from stuff you would have imagined, like parking, to other things that you might not have imagined, what's a good example? Details about the neighborhood where the theater is, details about the organization, the other kinds of things that happen in the theater, what the theater space looks like, how many steps, where the ramps are, you'd probably imagine those to be, whether there are devices for audio enhancement, whether there will be subtitles or supertitles or ASL interpretation, whether there'll be any healthcare or emergency personnel on site, and we do usually have someone on site for all of our work. We have police and we have emergency personnel on site, so we let them know about that. And also sort of more about the organization and the fact that since the performance is done by students, who they are, what they're studying, what gets them to this point, how they're chosen for their roles, things like that.
Great, thank you so much. So there's still no other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in with another one because this is something that actually just happened to us. So last week we actually just had our big annual convention in Minneapolis, and we actually had an attendee on site that hadn't let us know ahead of time that they would need some accommodations. So this was a person that was blind, and they actually very intentionally didn't let us know ahead of time because they didn't want us to kind of rearrange staff members' schedules to kind of go out of their way to assist them. So this question is actually for the both of you. What advice do you have for those of us that come into performance spaces where you have a patron that comes in and doesn't let you know ahead of time that they in fact do need some assistance getting around your space? So I'd like to actually ask both of you that question.
Judy, I'll let you start with this one.
Well, yeah, that is a great question, and that does happen. And my first comment is that if you are doing a lot of disability training and, with staff and with volunteers, then when that kind of stuff happens, it's much less perhaps jarring or worrisome, because you might already know how to help a blind person by guiding them, to and from an area and how to do that. So this is kind of what I was trying to get at, with my section, is that you lay the foundation, and if you just always assume that you're going to have people who are blind or people who are deaf or people who use wheelchairs, and you have, done all of your due diligence, your volunteers are trained, your staff is trained, then it's much less of an issue, and it makes it much more pleasant for everyone.
I love that.
Go ahead, Rhoda.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, Judy, but I love that answer, because that is exactly the right answer. So it should not be a situation that catches an organization unawares. We have to be ready, trained at all levels of the organization for situations we know about and situations we don't know about. And I think you're absolutely right, Judy, and I think that's a big problem when that comes up and an organization isn't aware. I have been at theaters. I go see live performances all the time. I have been at theaters who were obviously not prepared for an attendee in a wheelchair or an attendee who needs audio enhancement. And I've seen panicked staff, and, it makes you think, okay, so this, like you said, so few organizations really do the comprehensive training that they need to do.
Great. I think that's a perfect response, and we're lucky, the staff, especially because we had a larger staff on site, that we definitely were able to pivot and accommodate her. So we didn't have any hiccups at all. It just caught us off guard a little bit. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. I'm going to have kind of one closing question for the both of you, because it looks like we may not have any questions today, which is totally okay. So I'm curious if you can just kind of, each of you can close things out and give us kind of the big things to keep in mind. Judy, if you can talk specifically to the big things to keep in mind when you're interacting with people in your space with physical disabilities, and then Rhoda, if you can focus on kind of the big picture items when you're looking on working with somebody possibly on the autism spectrum. And I know that you guys covered this, in your presentations, but just kind of as a nice wrap up for us.
I can start. I think the first thing is to realize that we're people first. And, we're not a wheelchair. There's not a wheelchair coming through. There's a person in a wheelchair that's trying to get from point A to point B. And we want to be treated in the same way that you would treat any other patron. And again, if your staff has had some training and they're not, worried that they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, then it makes it so much more pleasant for all of us. But I'll give you a good example. A friend of ours was performing at a small art studio, dance studio in Berklee. And we got there, and there was a small lip up onto where the audience sat. And there used to be a ramp in that particular studio because we utilized it many times, but it wasn't there. And the woman that was both stage managing and presenting completely freaked out. And she said, I don't have time to deal with this. We don't have time to deal with this. We can't do this, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And I was ready to leave, even though I really wanted to support my friend. And I was with another friend in a wheelchair. And also a founding member of ACCESS. So, you know, we've traveled around the country and the world together. And, you know, she said, no, I've got some ramps out in my van, you know. And so a couple of the audience members, you know, helped us. But it was just such the wrong thing for this woman to do. You know, she made a big deal when it really wasn't a big deal. She humiliated Bonnie and I. She made an ass out of herself. So, you know, I think that, you know, when you encounter things like that, the best thing to do is, you know, not say, no, I can't do this. It's, okay, how can we do this? You know, and it offers you the opportunity to be creative and innovative and possibly to think outside the box. But again, you know, it's perfectly logical that, especially in this area, someone in a wheelchair might show up to a dance performance. And they were not prepared, even though they used to be prepared. So that's the big thing. It's like, you know, get your organization ready.
Great. So in terms of, I love that answer, and in terms of encountering individuals on the autism spectrum, the first thing I have to say is, quote, Autism Speaks, who says, you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So it's a wide range of expressions. No two people are alike in general, no two people with autism are alike. So I think what happens is folks who have less experience with individuals on the autism spectrum are anxious because they don't know what to expect, and they're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of unpredictable behavior. They're afraid of a tantrum or a meltdown or any of that. And I think what you really need to do, like Judy said, first of all, is remember that people are just people. We're all much more alike than we are different. We all want respect. We all want to feel seen and heard. We all want to be treated, we all don't, let's put it this way, we don't want to be dumbed down to, we want to be, or condescended, we all want to be treated respectfully. So I think to remember that, that an individual with autism often also experiences anxiety because they don't often know what's expected of them socially or what's expected of them behaviorally in a certain space, and to be calm and welcoming, to help them to feel safe, to be open to their behaviors. And you can also say to them, if someone, you know, with autism comes up to you and stands too close to you to talk, because some of them don't know necessarily what the space is, you can say, excuse me, is it all right if we have a little more personal space? I just would like a little more space. I'm going to take a step back so I have a little more space. You know, just calm and easy. And other things to remember are that it's often true that individuals in the autism spectrum experience excuse me, sensory overload, so that a whole lot of visual information is coming all at once and all feels very big and it's difficult to filter, or a whole lot of sound information is coming at once and it all feels very big and disorganized and tough to filter. So to create a calm, safe, welcoming atmosphere is really important. I would not touch any other human without permission, right, whether they have a diagnosis or not. For some people with autism, physical touch is difficult. Some it's not. So if you want to greet someone, shake their hand, give them a hug, you know, ask before out of respect. But mostly I think you should get to know the person, approach them with warmth and kindness, and care about them and be curious about them, just like you would any other person. And if you bring your authentic self to that interaction, then the person will feel welcome and you'll get to know them. And I now know many, many people on the autism spectrum, and they're really fantastic humans who I really enjoy talking with and getting to know. And I think a lot of the issues for folks just come out of fear of the unknown.
Great. So with that, and we don't have any other questions in the chat box, we'll go ahead and close things out for today. So thank you, Rhoda and Judy, and thank you for everybody that attended today's webinar, Creating Accessible Performances 101. Just a reminder that this webinar was recorded and will be available for replay in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, be sure to visit us at artsu.americansforthearts.org for other training opportunities and resources. Thank you, everyone.